For 17 years, I operated inside one of the most organized covens in southeast Nigeria. My name is Derere Kies. I'm from Oguta in Imo State, and my specific assignment was as a health attack coordinator. My job was to deploy spirits of infirmity into the bodies of targeted individuals, especially Christians who were becoming dangerous to our work. I planted sickness in people the way a farmer plants seeds. It was careful, strategic work, and I knew exactly what the harvest would look like. But Jesus Christ pulled me out of that darkness. And now I sit here not to terrify you, but to educate you. There is something happening inside the bodies of millions of believers right now that doctors simply cannot explain. The reason they can't explain it is because the origin isn't medical, it's spiritual. Today I'm going to expose exactly how the spirit of infirmity operates inside the human body. I'll tell you how we planted it, how it grows, how it disguises itself as chronic illness, and most importantly, how you can identify it and destroy it. What doctors are calling chronic illness, what specialists label as autoimmune disorders, what physicians manage with medication year after year is in many cases a demonic assignment placed inside your body by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I know this because I was one of those people. Let me be clear before I go further. The spirit of infirmity is not a metaphor. It's not just a theological concept pastors use to explain suffering. It's a real, literal demonic entity assigned to individuals with the specific purpose of creating physical illness in their bodies. In Luke 13, we read about a woman bent over for 18 years. Jesus didn't say she had a medical condition. He said she had a spirit of infirmity. He addressed it as a spirit. He cast it out as a spirit, and the woman was healed instantly, not gradually, not through treatment, instantly. The problem was never in her body. The problem was a spirit operating in her body. This distinction is something the modern church has largely abandoned. We've become so sophisticated, so educated, so trusting of medical science alone that we've forgotten there's an entire dimension of reality that blood tests can detect and MRI machines can't see. I'm not telling you to throw away your medicine or stop seeing your doctor. I'm telling you that if your medicine isn't working, if your doctors can't find the cause, if your condition resists every treatment, then there's a strong possibility you're fighting the wrong battle on the wrong battlefield. Now let me explain something most people don't understand about how covens operate. We didn't work randomly. We didn't just throw curses into the air, hoping they'd land on someone. Everything was calculated. Everything was strategic. Every attack had a specific target, a specific entry point, and a specific desired outcome. When it came to health attacks, the process was methodical. The first thing we needed was access. No spirit can enter a body without a legal right to do so. This is a spiritual law even demons must obey. So before we could deploy a spirit of infirmity, we had to identify The entry point. There were several common entry points we exploited over and over again. The first and most reliable door we used was unforgiveness. When a person carries deep, sustained unforgiveness, particularly towards someone who genuinely hurt them, it creates an opening in their spiritual covering. Matthew 18 makes this very clear. The passage describes a servant forgiven a massive debt who refused to forgive a small one, and the master handed him over to the tormentors until he paid everything. Those tormentors aren't metaphorical. In the spiritual realm, unforgiveness literally invites tormenting spirits, and spirits of infirmity are among the most common tormentors assigned through that door. The second entry point was generational covenants. Some families have a history of specific illnesses that repeat from generation to generation. The medical community calls this genetics. And yes, there is a genetic component. But what most people don't realize is that behind many generational health patterns, there's a spiritual covenant made sometimes centuries ago that gives the enemy legal access to attack the health of every person in that bloodline. Diabetes that runs in every generation, cancer that keeps appearing, heart disease that takes person after person. These aren't always just hereditary conditions. These aren't always just hereditary conditions. They are, in many cases, the fruit of a covenant no one in the family has ever broken. The third entry point was direct deployment through food, drink, or physical contact. This is what some call kitchen witchcraft or contact witchcraft, and it's far more common than you think. Of the three entry points, I am disease, the one believers are least aware of and most vulnerable to. A spirit of infirmity can be deposited into a person through a meal prepared with spiritual contamination. The person cooking may add a substance, sometimes physical like a powder or herb, sometimes purely spiritual through incantation spoken over the pot while it simmers. The person eating has no idea. They taste nothing unusual. They feel nothing at the moment. But once the food is consumed, the spirit enters through the digestive system and begins establishing itself. It can also be transferred through a handshake, a hug, or even through an object that's been enchanted. I personally knew witches who would anoint door knobs, chair cushions, and even gifts with demonic agents. A woman in our coven once enchanted a perfume bottle and gave it as a birthday present to a Christian woman she wanted to attack. The target sprayed that perfume on her neck every morning for months, and every morning she was reapplying the assignment without knowing it. Once the spirit is inside, it begins its work silently, gradually, in a way designed to look entirely natural. Now, let me tell you how the spirit of infirmity actually operates once it's inside the body, because this is the part most Christians don't understand. And it's why so many believers suffer from conditions no amount of medication can resolve. When a spirit of infirmity enters a body, It doesn't immediately cause dramatic illness. That's not how it works. The assignment is designed for long term occupation, not short term disruption. The spirit settles into a specific area of the body, usually an area already vulnerable through stress, previous injury, or genetic predisposition, and then it begins to amplify the weakness. Let me give you a specific example. If a person has a slight tendency toward digestive sensitivity, the spirit of infirmity will settle in the digestive system and magnify that sensitivity until it becomes a chronic condition. The person starts experiencing bloating, cramping, irregular digestion. They go to the doctor. Tests are run. Maybe they are diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. Me. Maybe they're told it's stress related. They're given medication. The medication manages the symptoms for a while, but the condition never fully resolves. It comes and goes. It flares up at specific times, often when the person is pressing deeper into prayer or fasting, and no one connects the dots. This is by design. The spirit of infirmity isn't trying to kill you quickly. It's trying to drain you slowly. It's trying to keep you so focused on managing your physical condition that you never have the energy, the focus, or the spiritual or the inspinement God placed on your life. Let me tell you about a woman I personally targeted. Her name was Sister Grace. She was a prayer warrior in a church in Abba. Not a famous church, not a mega church, just a small congregation of about 200 people. But Sister Grace had a prayer life that terrified our coven. When she prayed, things moved in the spiritual realm. When she prayed, things moved in the spiritual realm. Assignments were disrupted. Operations we'd been building for months would collapse overnight because this one woman spent 3 hours on her knees every morning before dawn. Our coven leader gave me the assignment to shut her down, not to kill her, not to destroy her family, just to reduce her prayer capacity, just to reduce her prayer capacity. To take her from 3 hours of fire every morning to barely being able to whisper a prayer before she ran out of energy. I studied her for weeks. I watched her spiritual covering. I looked for entry points, and I found one. Sister Grace had been carrying unforgiveness toward her older sister for over 9 years. Her sister had cheated her out of an inheritance after their mother died. It was a genuine wrong, a real betrayal, and Sister Grace had never released it. She prayed about everything else. She interceded for the nations, for her church, for her pastor, for strangers. But she couldn't bring herself to forgive her sister. That unforgiveness was a door that had been standing open for nearly a decade. I deployed a spirit of infirmity through that door. The specific assignment was chronic fatigue combined with persistent low grade pain. Within 3 weeks, Sister Grace began waking up exhausted. She'd always been a 5 a.m. riser, a woman who would bounce out of bed before the sun, wash her face with cold water, drop to her knees, and pray with a fire that could shake the heavens. Now she could barely drag herself out of bed by 7. Her, her alarm would go off, and she'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, feeling as though her bones were filled with lead. Where 3 hour prayer sessions became 90 minutes, then 60, then 30. Then she started skipping mornings entirely. Then she started skipping mornings entirely. She told herself she'd pray in the evening instead, but the evenings were worse. The fatigue deepened as the day went on. At 7 in the evening, she could barely keep her eyes open. She'd fall asleep during family devotions. Her husband began to worry. Then the pain started. It wasn't traumatic. It wasn't the kind of pain that sends you to the emergency room. It was a persistent ache in her lower back that never fully went away. It was a tightness in her neck that made turning her head uncomfortable. It was a soreness in her knees she attributed to age even though she was only 42. Each symptom on its own seemed minor. Together, they created a constant draining experience that sapped her will to do anything beyond the absolute minimum. She went to the doctor. Blood tests showed nothing abnormal. Thyroid was fine. Iron was fine. Vitamin levels were fine. Vitamin levels were fine. The doctor told her she was probably stressed and recommended she rest more. He suggested she try yoga and reduce her caffeine intake. She followed his advice. Nothing changed. She went to another doctor. Same tests, same results, same advice. She tried supplements. She changed her diet. She started walking in the mornings instead of praying. Nothing helped. And here's what breaks me most as I look back. Sister Grace began to lose her identity. She'd always been the prayer warrior, the one people called when they needed intercession, the one the pastor relied on for spiritual covering. Now she was the tired one, the one who showed up late, the one who sat in the back, the one who apologized for not being able to do what she used to do. The spirit of infirmity hadn't just attacked her body, it had attacked her identity. It had reduced her from a weapon in God's hands to a woman managing symptoms. That acceptance was exactly what we wanted. Because once a person accepts the condition as normal, they stop fighting it. They stop looking for the real cause. They manage it instead of destroying it. And the spirit gets to remain indefinitely. Sister Grace's breakthrough came 11 months later. A visiting evangelist came to her church and preached on the spirit of infirmity. He described exactly what she'd been experiencing: the fatigue, the normal test results, the slow decline. And then he asked a question that shattered her. He said, "Is there anyone you haven't forgiven?" The Holy Spirit pierced her heart. She wept for 40 minutes. She forgave her sister that night, not with her mind, with her spirit. She released the debt completely, and then she took authority over the spirit of infirmity that had been feeding on her for almost a year. Within 2 weeks, her energy returned. Within a month, she was back to 3 hour prayer sessions. Within 3 months, our entire Operation in that region was collapsing because Sister Grace was back and she was praying with an authority she'd never had before because now she understood what she was fighting. When I tell you these things, I tell them with grief. I helped to destroy that woman's health for almost a year. I watched her suffer and I celebrated it. That's the kind of person I was, and that's the kind of darkness that operates in covens every single day. Don't just hear this testimony and move on. Participate. If you're someone who's been experiencing unexplained fatigue, pain, or illness, I want you to write in the comments right now, I take authority over every spirit of infirmity in my body. Write it, declare it, make it public, because there's power in declaration and there's power in community. Now, let me tell you about the second method we used, because the spirit of infirmity doesn't only operate through unforgiveness. There's a second mechanism that's even more insidious, and it's the one that affects families across generations. Generational spirits of infirmity are among the most difficult assignments to break because the person suffering doesn't even know they're under one. They look at their family history and see a pattern of illness, but they attribute it to genetics. They say, diabetes runs in my family. Cancer is in our bloodline. They say, heart disease took my father and his father before him, and they accept it as an inevitability. But what they don't realize is that behind that genetic pattern, there's a spiritual covenant. Somewhere in their family line, someone made an agreement, whether they knew it or not, that gave the enemy legal access to the health of every descendant. Sometimes it was a direct covenant with a witch doctor. Sometimes it was participation in rituals or ceremonies. Sometimes it was as simple as a grandmother who consulted a herbalist who was secretly practicing witchcraft. That one act, that one moment of spiritual compromise, opened a door that was never closed. Let me tell you about a family I watched our covenant attack for 3 generations. The patriarch, a man named Papa Okokosa, had consulted a diviner in the 1960s when his business was failing. His market stall in Onitsha had been profitable for years, but suddenly everything dried up. Customers stopped coming, goods spoiled before they could be sold. Debts accumulated. A neighbor told him about a powerful herbalist in a nearby village, a man who could fix any problem. Papa Okosa was desperate that he went. The diviner performed the ritual involving blood sacrifice. A chicken was killed. Words were spoken over the blood. Papa Okosa was told to drink something. He drank it. He was told to agree to certain terms. He agreed. He didn't understand what he was agreeing to. He thought it was just a cultural practice, a traditional remedy for bad luck. But in the spiritual realm, a covenant was established. The terms of that covenant, which Papa Okosa never knew, included the health of his descendants. The diviner spirits were given legal access to every person in that bloodline in exchange for the temporary blessing on the business. The business did recover for a time. Papa Okosa interpreted this as proof the herbalist was legitimate. He never went back. He never thought about it again. He went to church every Sunday. He considered himself a Christian. He had no idea that the covenant he made that afternoon in a dusty vial, no large would ripple through his family for decades. Papa Okosa died of a stroke at 58. His eldest son died of a stroke at 55. His second son was diagnosed with severe hypertension at 43, despite being physically fit and having no obvious risk factors. His granddaughter developed unexplained heart palpitations at 27, palpitations so severe she sometimes thought she was dying. Every generation, the same pattern, the same organ system, the same type of cardiovascular distress. The medical community looked at the family history and said, this is hereditary cardiovascular disease, strong genetic predisposition, managed with medication and lifestyle changes. In the natural, that's what it looked like. But in the spiritual realm, there was a covenant operating a spirit of infirmity assigned to every person in that bloodline who reached a certain age, activated at the point when they were positioned to do the most damage to the enemy's kingdom. If you're hearing this and recognize this pattern in your own family, pay attention. The breakthrough came through the granddaughter. She was a strong believer. She attended a deliverance conference where the minister spoke specifically about generational health curses. Something stirred in her spirit. She went home and began researching her family history. She spoke to her grandmother, who reluctantly admitted that Papa Okosa had visited a diviner. She found out what had been done. Then she did something no one in her family had ever done. She stood in the gap. She repented on behalf of her ancestor. She renounced the covenant that had been made. She broke it by the authority of the blood of Jesus Christ. She commanded every spirit of infirmity operating through that covenant to leave her body and her bloodline. Her heart palpitations stopped within 1 week. They never returned. Her uncle, the 1 week, its severe hypertension, attended a prayer service. She organized and went through the same deliverance process. His blood pressure, which had been dangerously high for over a decade, despite 3 different medications, normalized within 2 months. His doctor reduced his medication, then reduced it again, then took him off entirely. The doctor had no explanation, but the family knew. That's the power of understanding what you're actually fighting. When you know the root, you can destroy it. When you only treat the symptom, you manage it forever. Now, let me continue because there's a third method, critically important, the one most believers are completely unaware of. The spirit of infirmity can be deployed through what I call that assignment of confusion. This is when a spirit attacks the body in a way that produces symptoms across multiple systems, making it nearly impossible for doctors to diagnose. The person experiences headaches, joint pain, fatigue, digestive issues, skin problems, and brain fog all at the same time. They go from specialist to specialist. They have tests done on every organ. Every test comes back normal or inconclusive. Doctors are baffled. They start suggesting it might be psychological. They recommend antidepressants. They suggest stress management. The person begins to believe maybe they're going crazy. Maybe it's all in their head, but it's not in their head, it's in their spirit. The spirit of infirmity is deliberately creating multi system symptoms specifically to prevent diagnosis. Because if the condition is never identified, it's never treated. And if it's never treated correctly, the person never gets free. If this resonates with you, if you're the person going from doctor to doctor, getting test after test, hearing the words, we can't find anything wrong, then listen carefully. You're not crazy. Your pain is real. Your symptoms are raw. And but the origin may not be where anyone has been looking. Let me tell you about Brother Emma. He was a school teacher in Abba, a good man, a faithful Christian. He taught biology during the day and led Bible study at his church 3 evenings a week. He was 36 when the symptoms began. It started with persistent headaches, not severe, but constant, a pressure behind his eyes that never fully went away. He saw an optometrist. His vision was fine. He saw a general practitioner. Blood pressure was normal. He was told to drink more water and rest. Then the joint pain started. His knees first, then his wrists, then his shoulders. He was tested for arthritis, negative. Tested for lupus, negative. Tested for rheumatoid markers, negative. The doctor said, sometimes these things happen. Take anti inflammatory medication. Then the fatigue hit, deep bone level exhaustion. No amount of sleep could resolve. He'd sleep 9 hours and wake up feeling like he hadn't slept at all. His wife noticed he was no longer leading Bible study with the same fire. He was going through the motions. His teaching at school suffered. His students noticed the change. Then digestive issues started, cramping after meals, sensitivity to foods he'd eaten his entire life, bloating so severe he sometimes couldn't button his trousers by evening. He was tested for celiac disease, food allergies, parasites, bacterial infections. Everything came back clean. In 18 months, Brother Emma saw 11 different doctors across 4 specialties. He spent money his family couldn't afford on tests and consultations. His wife sold her gold earrings, her wedding gift from her mother, to pay for a specialist consultation in Lagos. No one could tell him what was wrong. The frustration was destroying him, not just physically, but psychologically and spiritually. He began to question God. He began to wonder if he'd done something wrong. He began to think maybe God was punishing him for something he couldn't identify. This is another weapon the spirit of infirmity uses. It doesn't just attack your body, it attacks your theology. It makes you believe God is the one making you sick. It makes you believe your suffering is deserved. Once you believe that, you stop fighting. Why would you fight against something you believe God is doing? Brother Emma stopped leading Bible study. He told the pastor he needed a break. He stopped praying in the mornings. He started watching television late at night because he couldn't sleep anyway. His marriage began to strain under the weight of his depression and constant physical complaints. His children grew quiet around him because they didn't understand why their father was always in pain. What none of those doctors knew, what Brother Emma himself didn't know, was that he was under a coordinated spiritual attack. His church had been growing rapidly. The Bible study he led on Wednesday evenings had become so popular that people were coming from other neighborhoods. A. Souls were being saved, backsliders were returning, and our coven had identified him as a high value target. I was assigned to his case, and the strategy I used was exactly what I described: multi system deployment. I sent a spirit of infirmity with instructions to create symptoms across as many body systems as possible. The goal wasn't to him. The goal was to confuse. The goal was to keep him chasing diagnosis instead of chasing God. The goal was to drain his finances, his energy, his confidence, and his faith, one appointment at a time. It was working until his wife did something we didn't anticipate. She stopped looking at the symptoms and started looking at the timing. She noticed his health decline began exactly when his ministry started growing. She noticed his worst episodes always happened before major church events. She noticed every time he was about to lead a significant prayer meeting, a new symptom would appear. She said to him, "This is not medical, this is spiritual." That one statement changed everything. It shifted the battlefield. Instead of fighting in doctors' offices, they started fighting on their knees. His wife organized a 3-day fast. She gathered 12 intercessors from their church. They prayed specifically against the spirit of infirmity. They asked the Holy Spirit to reveal the entry point. During the second night of the fast, God showed Brother Emma a vision of a meal he'd eaten at a colleague's house 6 months before his symptoms began. A colleague who, it was later discovered, had connections to traditional religious practices. Brother Emma renounced every covenant made through that meal. He commanded the spirit of infirmity to leave his body. He pleaded the blood of Jesus over every organ, every system, every cell. His wife stood in agreement with him. Within 10 days, the headaches were gone. Within 3 weeks, the joint pain disappeared. Within 6 weeks, his injury returned to normal. Within 2 months, he was leading Bible study with more authority than ever before. The doctor, the same one who'd run over 20 tests and found nothing, said to him, "Whatever you did, keep doing it." My name is Darechies. I served the enemy for 17 years. I was responsible for planting sickness in bodies that belong to God. I deployed spirits of infirmity against prayer warriors, against pastors' wives, against school teachers and businesswomen and mothers who were simply trying to serve God faithfully. I did it with precision. I did it without remorse. I did it for 17 years. But the God of heaven reached into that darkness and pulled me out. They never suspect. He forgave the unforgivable. He cleaned what I thought was permanently stained. He gave me a new assignment, not to plant sickness, but to expose it, not to destroy health, but to restore it, not to serve the kingdom of darkness, but to dismantle it one testimony at a time. That's why I'm here. That's why this channel exists. That's why I'll keep speaking until every believer suffering under a spirit of infirmity they don't even recognize has the weapons they need to be free. Stay covered, stay armed. Thank you for staying with me through this entire testimony. What I've shared with you today isn't entertainment, it's warfare intelligence, everything. I've told you about how the spirit of infirmity operates, how it enters through unforgiveness, through generational covenants, through contaminated food and contacts, through contaminated, how it disguises itself as chronic illness and resists medical treatment. This is real. I lived it for 17 years. I planted sickness in bodies that belonged to God. I watched believers suffer and I celebrated it. But Jesus Christ pulled me out of that darkness. And now my assignment is to give you the weapons you need to be free. If this testimony has opened your eyes, if you now understand something about your health you didn't understand before, if you prayed that prayer of deliverance with me, then I need you to take the next step. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. This isn't just another YouTube channel. T is warfare training. Every video we release is another strategy exposed, another assignment disrupted, another weapon placed in your hands. The enemy has been operating in secrecy for too long. He's been planting spirits of infirmity in the bodies of God's people, and no one has been naming it for what it is. That changes now, but you need to stay connected. You need to stay covered. You need to stay armed with every testimony, every revelation, every prayer we release. Subscribe now. Join this movement, and I will see you in the next testimony. Stay covered, stay armed.